Welcome to a new episode of the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders, a special interview series dedicated to the role of those who are responsible of advancing, of designing and executing the sustainability strategies of their respective organizations and progress towards their sustainability, their climate and environmental commitments. I'm pleased to have today our featured guest speaker for this week, Marcelo Piva, Regional Sustainability Director for the Middle East and Africa at Tetra Pak. Welcome, Marcelo.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today and looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks to you for making the time. I'd like to kick off the interview asking about your career at Tetra Pak. You've been in the company for over a decade now, and you've been also involved in the sustainability practice throughout this time. I wanted to ask, how was this role of the need of a regional director firstly identified in the company? And obviously, as one of the major packaging companies in the world, circularity and recycling is perhaps a large part of that function. So how was the role first identified, and how does the company ensures that their commitments in the recycling circular economy space are accomplished?
Yeah, so, well, first, it's been more than a decade. It's indeed completing 15 years this year after 2 months. So it's going to be another milestone in the company. And, well, sustainability at Tetra Pak is part of our DNA. So since its inception, Tetra Pak, although a global and very large organization, is still a family-owned business. So as part of the family principles from the housings, we have sustainability as one of the key drivers to deliver on our commitment of making food safe and available everywhere, while we are protecting, people, food, and the planet. So if we talk about the evolution and the creation of my position was not here 15 years ago. So it starts actually, back in the time, it was primarily focusing on environmental performance of our production sites, right? So when you talk about a decade ago, environment was pretty much into compliance on your production operations, environmental performance on delivering on the regulatory landscape of waste management, electricity consumption and wastewater treatment, ISO certifications, and etc. But sustainability has been growing and has been becoming broader and broader as it goes. So we see that sustainability today is not only about, even when we talk about circularity, recycling, it goes even beyond that. It goes on carbon neutrality, it goes on resources utilization, it goes on climate and biodiversity and other areas. And we at Tetra Pak, we also have evolved in that way, and we keep evolving, because I still see that sustainability is going to be shaping up itself as we go, because it's a very dynamic area. So in the beginning, we started understanding the need. As you say, I mean, we are primarily a packaging company, but we are actually an end-to-end supplier of solutions from A to Z in food processing and packaging. And we understood that our stakeholders, for example, our customers, as we are a B2B organization, the brand owners in this case, policymakers, consumers, we understood that there were demands coming from these areas that we would need to deliver on. So when you start having this broader perspective other than only your production sites, then how it evolved is that we started creating the role, but the role was still like a part-time role as part of marketing, or sometimes as part of communications, or one person handling the 3 departments. And this has evolved to the level that today we have an entire separate organization only looking after sustainability at Tetra Pak. And within sustainability, we also understand that sustainability is all like these different areas. So we have sustainability professionals looking after sourcing, looking after our capital equipment and processing equipment, looking after climate and biodiversity, another department looking into corporate social responsibility, and eventually the end of life or recyclability, circular economy, that we also have specific teams looking after this area within sustainability. And this is where I sit, for example, in the sustainability operations where my primary focus is into collection and recycling initiatives for post-consumer cartons. So it's an evolution that comes from a very narrow perspective of environment department all the way to the sustainability as we see today, and looking after all these, requirements that comes from all the stakeholders.
Yeah, so it seems like sustainability is now approaching a more holistic way than a few years ago. And I wanted to focus on that point, like how has the function changed in the sense, are you now implementing some sort of KPIs or metrics to ensure that the progress in those areas happen, maybe to ensure that a certain amount of those plastics gets, it comes from recycled sources or reused sources, or ensure that the carbon emissions from your value chain are reduced? How has it changed over the years in those aspects?
Yeah, so it's very dynamic, right? Because you depending on where you operate, you get different requirements or different expectations from the market itself. So a lot of these discussions on a lot of these initiatives, they are driven by the regulatory landscape. So you have a lot of new regulations coming. I mean, that's something that comes for everyone, and that you need to deliver on those. But you cannot deliver on something that you have not started long time ago. So as I said, because of our approach to sustainability, and I'm proud of being part of this sort of base that has been built all over the years, we have been preparing ourselves already to face what the world is facing today. So the crisis of resources, the carbon emissions control, and also increasing recycling. So all these areas, for example, investing in our packaging material itself to be more based on renewable sources. So then you have a much better carbon footprint perspective when you compare to other types of packaging coming from fossil sources. So this is not something that started now with all the demands on the net zeros or the carbon control. This is like years and years of development that we have been doing since nobody was talking about it, actually. At the same time, from recyclability perspective, now you have targets that comes with legislation. You have extended producer responsibility regulations that come to producers. And then if we haven't started long time ago preparing the infrastructure and preparing our packages to be designed in a way that they can be recycled, today we would have a very big challenge, because we would be facing targets in legislation and we wouldn't be able to deliver on them. So the same comes for all the other commitments that are linked to the brand owners, because we see today a lot of brand owners and governments proposing and committing on net zero targets and committing on their own recyclability targets and everything. And we are linked to them because we are suppliers to them. So we need to work into the entire value chain, from sourcing all the way to the use and post-consumer management of our packages. So we do have targets. Most of these targets, they are either driven by the regulations itself or by our own sustainability initiatives that we have them pretty much published in our sustainability reports. And that's an interesting point as well, because we see that when we talk about targets, we see when we talk about our roadmaps and how much are we delivering or performing, we see a very interesting increase in the applications and development of AI and IoT. So you have a lot of different types of technologies that now are becoming more and more useful for us to monitor our progress, to report on our progress, and also to take decisions. So I think it's, the development of technology together with all this sort of preparation work that has been put in place is supporting us to deliver on all these fronts that you have mentioned before.
Yeah, and at the corporate level, you are the regional director for the Middle East and Africa. So does that mean is there a global team for Tetra Pak that sets the guidelines in terms of sustainability, and then is that distributed across different regions? How is the company structured to ensure that the functionality of the sustainability department across regions?
Yeah, so we have our sustainability vice president reporting directly to our global CEO. So it's a global sort of organization. And then from this vice president, then you have the, as I mentioned before, that we have sustainability operations, then we have climate and biodiversity, and we have different areas within sustainability that report into this area. Again, they are all central. And from there, you start then cascading to the markets. So then you have the regions like Middle East and Africa, you have Americas, you have Asia. So within these regions, then you have the sustainability teams based in those regions. So as you say, yes, the strategy comes from the global and central team with the main strategies. And then once they get cascaded to the markets, then of course it gets adapted to the reality of each one of the markets, because we have very different targets and priorities and needs in each of the regions. I mean, there is a very big difference in my role compared to the regional director based in Europe, for example.
Yeah, so and you mentioned, like, in that sense, the regulatory landscape is a big part of how you operate from one market to another. How do you see the Middle East compared to other markets where Tetra Pak operates in that aspect?
The way I see is like Middle East, it can be an example, but overall, in any region that you operate as a sustainability professional, you have a different approach compared to other regions. Even the level of capabilities that you need to have, to deliver on the job that is required from you changes. So if I give an example from Middle East, of course, here water scarcity and desertification is a big thing, right? Which is not in any case apparent in South America, or Europe. So here we have a lot of focus on the resources, but at the same time we have a less mature sort of regulatory landscape when it comes to areas, as we are talking here about circularity and recycling, waste management, sort of development, let's say, position that we have today in Middle East is still way back compared to where other areas in the world, for example, Europe, is at the moment. So what happens is that here you have a lot of work that is required from the sustainability professional to be much more involved in operations, like creating recycling capabilities, creating collaboration and engagement partnerships with recycling companies, collection companies, and eventually trying to support and collaborate with government to develop the regulations and the extended producer responsibility in a way that can sort of support and activate all these operations. So it's a lot more involvement in making things happen and like building even the infrastructure sometimes that we have investments and all these things. But if you compare, with my colleagues when they are based in Europe, for example, there you have much more of another type of engagement, because it's more on the regulations. It's about understanding what are the changes. And by the way, we have this big wave of changes coming from the packaging and packaging waste regulations that are being processed in Europe at the moment. And this is changing a lot of what has been done for the past many years. So now you have a lot of advocacy that is required, a lot of stakeholder engagement. You have a lot of awareness activities that you need to do with consumers, because you are changing some of the collection systems, implementing, for example, the deposit return systems. So it's like, depending on where you are, depending on the needs of that particular market, then you can understand what would be like the main role or the main capabilities that a sustainability professional would be required to deliver on. So it's quite different. If you ask the same question for 3 or 4 different professionals in different areas, they would give you different answers of what are the key focus on sustainability, for example.
And have you noticed any uptick in terms of regulations to ensure that a higher number of packagings of plastics end up recycled or reused, or at least don't end up in landfills in both in the Middle East and Africa? Have you seen governments being more proactive, the private sector being more proactive in advancing this kind of regulations?
Yes, I see. And of course, I mean, things get triggered from more developed countries, right? So you have this packaging waste regulations. Then, of course, this gets to be seen by governments all around. And I see a very interesting movement happening from Middle East and Africa in trying to accelerate the regulatory landscape and trying to accelerate as well the infrastructure for collection and recycling. But the one thing that we also can see is that sometimes the government, they actually understand that getting the brand owners or getting the let's say the international companies to collaborate with them and to understand based on the previous experiences and the geographical sort of reach that these companies have, this can be a very good platform to collaborate and work together with them. So if I give you an example from the UAE has implemented the Circular Economy Policy Council. So this is the council that is developing all policies and regulations towards a circular economy, which involves several things: design for recycling, infrastructure, awareness, and more importantly, the extended producer responsibility. And the interesting thing is that this council, this policy council, is formed not only by government, it's actually a mix of government entities and private sector in which we are collaborating with them. So there is a very interesting change in the way Middle East and Africa have been looking into regulations and the importance of improving the waste management sector. And also there is quite an interesting approach as a collaborative approach instead of just private sector waiting to see what is going to happen and if they are going to be surprised with a new regulation tomorrow. So I think this collaboration and joint work between the private and public sectors is being very important for the region for us to develop on the new policies for circular economy.
Yeah, and what would be your advice for those companies that are starting to, create their sustainability departments from scratch, that they're maybe trying to figure out what is the best approach to create sustainability dedicated teams to advance their sustainability strategies and commitments?
For companies that are still in this stage where they don't have yet, the structure of sustainability or the department, or let's say something that they are not looking yet at sustainability in a way that it's a main priority, I would take a step-by-step approach. Because first of all, it's very important and actually crucial that you need to align sustainability goals, with the organization's overall strategy and values. So the sustainability roles should actually reflect an alignment between the sustainability goals that the company is willing to achieve, together with the organization's overall strategy and value. So once you have this alignment, then you need to understand what are the key areas of impact of the business, in line with the government agendas and the regulatory landscape, to see then, as I mentioned before, depending on the needs or depending on the requirements or expectations from the stakeholders where you are operating, then you need to define what capabilities do you need, because it's not just putting someone or employing someone as a sustainability professional if he or she doesn't have that specific capability to deal with the requirements of that specific region or the main goals that you set for your organization, then this cannot be really operated. Once you do that, then there is a very important point, that is getting the top level executives and board members to ensure that sustainability becomes part of the organization's culture. So not to be like this sort of department aside, that, it needs to be well planned and it's to be resourced. So once you get that with appropriate level of relevance and priority in the organization, then you can really make sure that this organization or this department is going to work, and it's going to work properly, delivering on the promises and delivering on the commitments from the company. But again, as I said, it's a very dynamic sort of environment, and being in this sort of road for quite some time, what I also can say is, it's important to understand it's not about creating one sort of sustainability department with some people employed as sustainability professionals there and let them drive, let them do the job. Actually, sustainability needs to be a culture in the entire organization, because everyone in any organization should be able to talk about sustainability, not to the level of being experts, because of course you have people to deliver on that, but at least to understand, I mean, their own organization, their own way of supporting, reducing their environmental impact, or to deliver on the sustainability agenda that is supposed to be done by the company. So everybody should be able to talk sustainability, but of course you need to have this organization to make things happen, and with the right proper plans and resources in place.
It's interesting you mentioned that part. We just had, as part of this interview series, a previous interview with the CSO of Aramex and also the CSO of Shell Group, and they were both mentioning in separate interviews that they like to keep their sustainability team small so they could spread the sustainability message and make the sustainability a responsibility of the entire organization. You know, because as it goes beyond the role of the chief sustainability officer or the person in charge of the sustainability team. And in terms of skill sets, we've seen like very different profiles taking the role of directors of sustainability, chief sustainability officers, from people who have been involved in environmental and sustainability issues for many years, but also others that they were, a few years ago, they were running other departments, from logistics to finance or even sales, and all of a sudden they've become the sustainability leaders of their respective organizations. What would you say they are the main skills that a head of sustainability or sustainability director like yourself needs in his toolbox?
Yeah, so one of the sort of problems, as you say, is that sustainability, because it's something not very old, it's quite new concept, and it keeps evolving. So you don't have that much of, you know, specific. You have a lot of, I mean, MBAs and capability building tools that you can use, but not as much as like civil engineering, as some other activities that you have for a much longer time, much older. So this creates, as you say, a little bit of a variety of levels of capabilities in different areas when you appoint professionals for that role. But to this point, when you say, you know, for the toolbox, it really, that's why it's so important that when you are implementing or when you are opening a position, you need to really understand what are you trying to achieve as an organization, and what is the, let's say, the other stakeholders around you expecting you to deliver on. And why I'm saying that, as I said, if you get someone that is extremely experienced in putting together recycling systems, recycling operations, you even hire someone that comes from the recycling industry that can do a great job in that area. But maybe when it comes to engaging with policymakers, engaging with some of these discussions with the government, and also having this advocacy work, he or she would not be well equipped for that specific activity, and vice versa. Someone that comes from years operating, for example, in a packaging recovery organization or running a department under the Ministry of Environment, and then coming to a more operational role where he or she needs to deliver on all these needs of creating value chains for recycling, and then engaging with, depending on the level of engagement or development of the country, engaging with waste pickers and getting them in formal sector, he or she would maybe not be well equipped for that as well. So what I would say, yes, it's important to be as much as trying to expanding your knowledge, a little bit trying to mix operational knowledge, technology understanding, and at the same time regulations and public relations and etc. But in one way or another, whenever you are landing as a sustainability professional in one specific role, then there you need to somehow give some direction to your sort of capability building, to understand where you can add more impact to the role that you are playing. So there is no straight answer. Yes, you know, you need to, for example, tick the boxes of these sort of capabilities, but at the same time, it really depends on which areas and which countries or regions or which sort of commitments the organization that you work for are going to be implementing. So that's more or less it.
Yeah. So it seems like 30 minutes go by pretty quickly. We'll have to wrap it up here, but Marcelo Piva, Regional Sustainability Director for the Middle East and Africa of Tetra Pak, thank you so much for your insights today and for participating in our special interview series for the COP28 campaign we're launching for the run-up of COP28, 12 weeks, 12 podcasts, 100 voices that will culminate in a live event taking place on November 22nd at NYU Abu Dhabi. Thank you so much, Marcelo, for your insights today.
No, pleasure is mine. Thank you so much.